The flashing red and blue lights cut through the rainy Virginia night, illuminating the sleek black SUV. Inside sat a man who had commanded carrier strike groups, advised presidents, and navigated the most treacherous waters on Earth. But tonight, on a lonely stretch of highway, Admiral Mason Brooks was just another black man in the wrong neighborhood, pulled over by a rookie cop looking for a problem. What started as a routine traffic stop was about to trigger a crisis that would echo all the way to the Pentagon. The rain was coming down in sheets, a relentless drumming downpour that turned the asphalt of Highway 460 into a dark, slick mirror. Admiral Mason Brooks, United States Navy, tapped his fingers lightly against the leather steering wheel of his newly leased Chevrolet Tahoe. He was exhausted. It was a bone-deep weariness that came not just from the long drive from Washington, D.C., down to his quiet coastal property in North Carolina, but from 40 years of service. Brooks was a 4-star admiral, one of only a handful in the entire history of the Navy, and the second black man to achieve the rank. His chest, when in uniform, bore the weight of the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and campaign ribbons from conflicts most of the country had already forgotten. He had commanded the USS Bainbridge-led Battle Group Romeo and served as commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. But tonight, he was just Mason, dressed in a comfortable navy blue quarter-zip sweater and slacks, heading home for a rare weekend of leave. He was passing through Windsor, Virginia, a small speck of a town known mostly as a speed trap for out-of-state drivers. The Tahoe was brand new, the dealer plates taped securely to the inside of the dark-tinted rear window, exactly where they were supposed to be. Behind him, the sudden violent eruption of strobe lights shattered the rhythmic hypnosis of the windshield wipers. Red and blue splashed across his rearview mirror. Brooks sighed, easing off the accelerator. He checked his speedometer. He was doing 45 in a 55 zone, cautious in the heavy rain. He hadn't been swerving. He hadn't run a light. He signaled right, looking for a safe place to pull over. The shoulder was narrow, just a strip of muddy gravel dropping off into a waterlogged ditch. Up ahead, perhaps half a mile, the neon sign of a BP gas station glowed through the downpour. Standard procedure, he thought. Get to a well-lit area. It's safer for me, safer for the officer. He turned on his hazard lights to acknowledge the cruiser behind him and maintained a slow, steady speed toward the gas station. He had taught this exact protocol to his son, now a lieutenant commander himself, and to countless junior officers under his command. In the cruiser behind him, Officer Daniel Crocker, barely 2 years out of the academy, gripped his steering wheel, his knuckles white. To Crocker, the tinted SUV rolling slowly past the dark patches of highway wasn't a cautious driver. It was a suspect attempting to flee. Dispatch Unit 4. Crocker barked into his radio, his voice tight. I have a vehicle failing to yield. Dark SUV Chevy Tahoe. No visible tags. Proceeding eastbound on 460. Copy Unit 4. The dispatcher crackled back. Do you need backup? Affirmative. Initiating a high-risk stop. Crocker felt the adrenaline spike. He had been trained to look for the anomalous, the suspicious. And in his mind, a vehicle with heavily tinted windows and no obvious license plate driving slowly through his jurisdiction at night fit the profile of a drug runner or worse. He didn't consider the temporary tag visible through the rear glass. He only saw what he expected to see. A mile down the road, Officer Joe Gutierrez heard the call. Gutierrez was a veteran of the force, a man with a reputation for a short fuse and a penchant for aggressive tactics. He slammed his foot on the gas, his cruiser roaring to life, sirens wailing as he sped toward Crocker's location. Brooks pulled into the BP station, the harsh fluorescent lights of the canopy illuminating the hood of his Tahoe. He put the vehicle in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his window. He placed both hands firmly on the top of the steering wheel, right where they could be seen. Routine, he told himself again. Just a routine stop. But as he glanced in his side mirror, the situation violently shifted from routine to terrifying. Crocker had parked his cruiser at a sharp angle behind the Tahoe, using the engine block for cover. His door flew open, and the officer stepped out into the rain, his service weapon drawn and pointed directly at Brooks's head. A second later, Gutierrez's cruiser skidded into the lot, boxing the Tahoe in from the side. Gutierrez was out of his car before it even settled on its suspension, his gun also drawn, sprinting toward the passenger side of the SUV. "Show me your hands. Show me your hands right now." Crocker screamed, his voice raw with manufactured panic. "My hands are on the steering wheel, officer," Brooks said calmly, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the noise of the rain and the shouted commands. He didn't move a muscle. He knew the absolute necessity of stillness in the face of an armed, agitated police officer. "Get out of the car! Get out of the fucking car now!" Gutierrez bellowed from the passenger side, his weapon leveled through the window. "Officers, I am keeping my hands visible," Brooks said, his tone authoritative, but completely non-threatening. He was an expert in de-escalation, having negotiated tensions in the South China Sea. He was trying to apply those same principles in a Virginia gas station. "I am not reaching for anything. I need you to tell me why I am being stopped." "I said get out of the car!" Crocker yelled, taking a step closer, his gun shaking slightly. "I am honestly afraid to get out," Brooks stated clearly, his eyes locked on Crocker. He wanted his words on the body camera footage he knew they must be wearing. He needed a record that he was compliant, yet fearful of their unprovoked aggression. Gutierrez, moving to the driver's side, leaned in close to the open window. His face was twisted in anger. "Yeah, you should be," he snarled. "You're fixing to ride the lightning boy." Brooks felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Ride the lightning. It was an archaic, ugly phrase referencing the electric chair. It was a death threat, pure and simple, delivered casually over a traffic stop. "Officer, I am an Admiral in the United States Navy." Brooks said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of his command. "My identification is in my wallet in my back pocket. I am not moving until you lower your weapons." "I don't care if you're the damn Secretary of Defense," Gutierrez yelled. "You're getting out of this car." Gutierrez didn't wait. He holstered his firearm, pulled a large canister of OC pepper spray from his belt, and without another word, discharged a heavy stream directly into Brooks's face. The pain was instantaneous and blinding. It felt as though a hornet's nest had been ignited inside his eyes and lungs. Brooks gasped, choking on the acrid chemical cloud that filled the cabin of the Tahoe. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hands, instinctively, coming off the wheel to cover his face, fighting the overwhelming urge to claw at his burning skin. "Get out, get out!" Gutierrez was screaming, grabbing Brooks by his sweater and violently yanking the 60-year-old man from the vehicle. Brooks stumbled out into the rain, coughing violently, completely blinded. Before he could regain his footing, Gutierrez hit him with a knee strike to the thigh. Brooks collapsed onto the wet concrete of the gas station lot. Rough hands grabbed his arms, twisting them painfully behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, biting into his skin. "Stop resisting, stop resisting!" Crocker yelled, kneeling on Brooks's back. "I am not resisting." Brooks wheezed, his face pressed against the oily, rain-slicked pavement. He was a man who had stood on the bridge of warships during typhoons, but right now he was helpless, assaulted by the very people sworn to protect him. The rain continued to beat down on Brooks as he lay handcuffed on the concrete, gasping for air, the pepper spray searing his eyes and throat. Every breath was a jagged intake of fire. He could hear the officers talking above him, their tones shifting from the high-pitched screams of the assault to the self-justifying murmurs of men trying to construct a narrative. "Dispatch suspect is in custody," Crocker said, over his radio, slightly out of breath. "Send EMS to our location. Subject was exposed to OC spray." "I told him to get out," Gutierrez muttered mostly to himself. He was eluding, non-compliant, had to use force. Brooks forced his eyes open a fraction of an inch, the stinging immense. He could see the blurry shapes of the two officers standing over him. "My wallet!" He rasped, his voice rough. "In my right back pocket. Look at my ID," Gutierrez sneered. "We'll see who you are soon enough." He roughly patted Brooks down, finding the leather wallet. He flipped it open, shining his flashlight onto the cards inside. The beam illuminated a Virginia driver's license bearing the name Mason James Brooks. Behind it was a military identification card. Not the standard green active duty card, but the distinct blue card of a flag officer. And there, stark and clear against the background, were the 4 silver stars, rank/grade ADM/O10. Gutierrez stopped. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the steady drum of the rain. "What is it, Joe?" Crocker asked, noticing the sudden stillness in his partner. Gutierrez didn't answer immediately. He stared at the card, the implications of those 4 stars slowly crashing down on him. This wasn't just some guy. This wasn't even just an officer. This was a man who outranked generals, a man who possessed a direct line to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Crap!" Gutierrez whispered the word, barely escaping his lips. He shoved the wallet into his own pocket. "Get him up! Let's get him out of the rain!" They hauled Brooks to his feet, less aggressively this time, though the handcuffs remained tight. They guided him to the front of Crocker's cruiser, leaning him against the hood. "EMS is on the way, sir." Crocker said the "sir" slipping out involuntarily, a stark contrast to his earlier screams. Brooks didn't respond. He focused on breathing, on managing the intense pain in his eyes. He was furiously memorizing every detail, the badge numbers, the names on their uniforms, the exact sequence of events. He was no longer just a victim. He was an investigator, gathering evidence. 10 minutes later, the wail of an ambulance cut through the night. 2 paramedics hopped out, carrying a large jug of saline solution and a towel. They immediately began flushing Brooks's eyes, the cool liquid providing a brief, sharp relief from the burning chemicals. As the paramedics worked, a 3rd police vehicle arrived, a Ford Explorer marked Supervisor. A burly man in a white shirt stepped out, adjusting his duty belt. Lieutenant Thomas Vance, the shift commander, strode over to Crocker and Gutierrez. "What do we have?" Vance asked, his eyes scanning the scene, lingering on the handcuffed black man being treated by EMS. Gutierrez pulled Vance aside out of earshot of the paramedics, but Brooks, his hearing sharp, strained to listen. "Traffic stop for no tags. LT." Gutierrez said, his voice low, lacking its previous bluster. "Subject refused to yield, immediately drove a mile before pulling over here. When we initiated the stop, he refused to exit the vehicle. Highly uncooperative. Deployed OC spray and placed him in custody." Vance frowned. "Did you find a weapon?" "No weapon," Crocker chimed in. "He just wouldn't listen." "And the tags?" Gutierrez pointed to the back of Brooks's Tahoe. "Temporary tag is taped inside the rear window. Hard to see through the tint, especially in the rain." Vance sighed heavily. "All right. Who is he?" Gutierrez hesitated, glancing back at Brooks. He pulled the wallet from his pocket. and handed it to the lieutenant. "You might want to look at this." Vance opened the wallet. His reaction was almost identical to Gutierrez's, a sudden freezing of motion, a sharp intake of breath. He looked from the ID card to Brooks, who was now sitting on the bumper of the ambulance, eyes red and swollen, glaring back at him. "Jesus Christ," Vance muttered. He closed the wallet and walked purposefully over to Brooks. "Admiral Brooks." Vance said, his tone entirely different, professional and cautious. "I'm Lieutenant Vance with the Windsor Police Department." "Take these cuffs off me," Brooks demanded, his voice steady, despite the pain. Vance looked at Gutierrez. "Take them off, now." Gutierrez moved quickly, unlocking the cuffs. Brooks rubbed his raw wrists, glaring at the officer who had pepper-sprayed him. "Sir, there seems to have been a significant misunderstanding." Vance began, stepping into damage control mode. "My officers believed you were attempting to elude them. I was driving at a safe speed, looking for a well-lit area to pull over, as is standard safety protocol." Brooks replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I then kept my hands visible and requested the reason for the stop. For that, I was threatened with execution, pepper-sprayed, dragged from my vehicle and assaulted. Sir Officer Gutierrez deployed his OC spray because you were not complying with commands to exit the vehicle. That's our policy. Your policy is to point firearms at unarmed motorists for minor traffic infractions." Brooks interrupted, stepping toward Vance. "Your policy is to tell a citizen they are fixing to ride the lightning. Do not insult my intelligence, Lieutenant." Vance swallowed hard. He knew they were in deep trouble. The body cam footage alone would be a nightmare. "Admiral, look, we can take you down to the station, process the charges for obstruction and eluding. But that's going to create a massive paper trail. It'll get to your command. It could impact your career." Brooks narrowed his eyes. "Are you threatening me, Lieutenant?" "No, sir. Not at all," Vance said, quickly raising his hands pacifyingly. "I'm offering a professional courtesy. We take the cuffs off, we let the EMS finish flushing your eyes, and you drive home. We drop the charges, we forget this happened. You keep your career intact, and we avoid a messy situation." It was a classic police tactic, the phantom charge. Threaten a suspect with severe fabricated charges to coerce them into accepting a break by letting them go, ensuring they wouldn't file a complaint. They were banking on the assumption that a black man, even a highly successful one, would be terrified of the criminal justice system ruining his life. Brooks looked at the three officers. They saw a man they thought they could intimidate. He saw a systemic failure that he was in a unique position to expose. "I will not be extorted," Brooks said quietly. "It's not extortion, Admiral." Vance insisted, his voice tightening. "It's a favor. If I have committed a crime, Lieutenant, arrest me." Brooks challenged, holding out his hands, wrists together. "Charge me. Put it on the record. But know this, I will fight it, and I will demand the release of every second of footage from those body cameras." Vance stared at the four-star Admiral. He saw no fear in the man's eyes, only a cold, resolute fury. He knew then that the favor hadn't worked. They had caught a tiger by the tail, and they had no idea how to let go. "Fine," Vance said, his voice tight. "You're free to go, Admiral. No charges will be filed tonight." "I need your names and badge numbers," Brooks demanded, "and the name of your chief of police." Vance reluctantly provided the information. Brooks noted it down in the notepad he kept in his glove compartment. His eyes still burned fiercely. His clothes were soaked with rain and chemicals, and his body ached from the assault. But his mind was razor-sharp. He climbed back into his Tahoe, the interior still reeking of pepper spray. He rolled down all the windows to air it out, started the engine, and slowly drove out of the gas station, leaving the 3 officers standing in the rain, watching the taillights disappear into the darkness. They thought they had let him go. They didn't realize he was just returning to base to prepare for war. Monday morning in the Pentagon, the massive 5-sided building hummed with the quiet, intense energy of the American military-industrial complex. In the E-ring, the outermost corridor housing the highest-ranking officials, the atmosphere was typically one of controlled urgency. Admiral Mason Brooks sat at his expansive oak desk, his face impassive. He was in his service dress blue uniform, the 4 stars gleaming on his collar, the ribbons on his chest, a testament to a lifetime of discipline and service. Only the slight redness still visible in his eyes hinted at the ordeal of the weekend. Across the desk sat his Chief of Staff, Captain Sarah Jenkins, and his legal counsel, Commander David Ross. They had just finished watching the body camera footage. Brooks had used his considerable influence to have the Navy Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, secure the footage from the Windsor Police Department early Sunday morning, circumventing local bureaucracy. The video played on a large monitor mounted on the wall. They had watched it in agonizing silence, the aggressive approach, the drawn weapons, the horrific threat of riding the lightning, the blinding spray, and the violent takedown. When the video ended, Jenkins, a seasoned officer who had served in combat zones, looked visibly shaken. "Sir, that is assault. That is a blatant violation of your constitutional rights." Commander Ross, a sharp military lawyer, was already taking notes. "It's worse than that, Admiral. It's a textbook case of excessive force, unlawful detainment, and civil rights violations under color of law. They had no probable cause for a high-risk stop. The threat made by Officer Gutierrez alone is grounds for immediate termination and criminal charges." Brooks leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "They offered me a deal, David. They threatened to charge me with eluding and obstruction, implying it would ruin my career if I didn't agree to walk away quietly." Ross shook his head in disgust. "Coercion. They knew they messed up, and they tried to bury it by intimidating you. They clearly didn't know who they were dealing with." "No, they didn't," Brooks said quietly. "They saw a black man in a nice car and assumed the worst. They acted with impunity because they believed I was powerless to stop them. If they do this to a 4-star admiral, what are they doing to the kid driving home from his shift at the grocery store? What are they doing to the young enlisted sailor who gets pulled over in their town?" He stood up and walked over to the window looking out over the Potomac River. "I cannot let this stand. If I accept their favor and walk away, I am complicit. I am telling them their behavior is acceptable." He turned back to his team. "Sarah, get me the Secretary of the Navy on the line. I need to brief him. David, I want you to start drafting a civil suit. I want a federal civil rights lawsuit filed against Officer Gutierrez, Officer Crocker, and the town of Windsor. We are not settling this quietly." "Yes, sir," Ross said, snapping his notebook shut. "I'll start immediately. And Sarah," Brooks added, his voice hardening, "before you call the SECNAV, find me the direct line to the Chief of Police in Windsor, Virginia. Chief Rodney. What was his name?" Jenkins checked her notes. "Chief Rodney Palmer, sir. Get him on the phone, now." 10 minutes later, the secure line on Brooks's desk buzzed. He picked up the receiver. "Admiral Brooks." "Sir, I have Chief Palmer from the Windsor Police Department on the line," Jenkins said. "Put him through." There was a click, and then a hesitant voice came over the line. "Hello, this is Chief Palmer." Palmer sounded tired. He was the head of a small-town department dealing mostly with petty theft and traffic tickets. He had received a vague report from Lieutenant Vance about an incident involving a military officer over the weekend, but Vance had downplayed it, calling it a misunderstanding that had been resolved without charges. Palmer was entirely unprepared for who was on the other end of the line. "Chief Palmer, this is Admiral Mason Brooks, United States Navy." The voice boomed through the receiver, carrying the authoritative weight of a man accustomed to commanding thousands. Palmer sat up straight in his cheap office chair. Yes, Admiral. How can I help you?" "Chief, I am calling regarding an incident that occurred in your jurisdiction on Friday night involving two of your officers, Daniel Crocker and Joe Gutierrez." Palmer frowned. "Yes, Sir, Lieutenant Vance briefed me on that. He said there was a stop regarding a missing license plate and some non-compliance, but that you were released without charges. I'm sorry if there was an inconvenience." "It was not an inconvenience, Chief Palmer," Brooks cut him off sharply. "It was an assault." Palmer blinked, taken aback by the sheer force of the Admiral's tone. "Assault, sir. I assure you, my officers follow strict protocols. Your officers drew their firearms on an unarmed, compliant motorist." Brooks stated his voice cold and precise. "They threatened to execute me using the phrase, 'fixing to ride the lightning.' They deployed OC spray directly into my face without provocation while my hands were clearly visible. They dragged me from my vehicle, struck me, and handcuffed me in the rain." Silence hung heavy on the line. Palmer felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Admiral, I was not informed of these details." "I have the body camera footage, Chief. My NCIS detachment secured it this morning," Brooks said. "I have reviewed it with my legal counsel. The actions of your officers were not only a gross violation of my civil rights, but a display of staggering incompetence and racial profiling. So please, let's not jump to conclusions about racial—" "Chief Palmer." Brooks interrupted his voice, dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Do not attempt to placate me. I am a 4-star admiral. I have commanded fleets. I know what an ambush looks like. Your officers saw a black man driving a nice vehicle and decided to escalate a routine traffic stop into a life-threatening situation." Palmer was stammering now, entirely out of his depth. "Admiral, I will initiate an internal affairs investigation immediately. I promise you we will look into this thoroughly." "An internal investigation is insufficient, Chief," Brooks replied. "I am informing you as a courtesy that I am filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against your department Officer Crocker and Officer Gutierrez. Furthermore, I will be forwarding the body camera footage to the Department of Justice to request an investigation into the patterns and practices of the Windsor Police Department." Palmer felt the floor drop out from under him. A federal lawsuit, the DOJ. This was the kind of thing that destroyed police departments. "Admiral, please, surely we can discuss this. A lawsuit will draw a massive amount of media attention. It will be a circus." "That is precisely the point, Chief," Brooks said, his voice unwavering. "Light is the best disinfectant. Your officers believed they could operate with complete impunity. They thought they could terrorize a citizen and bury the evidence with a phantom charge. They were wrong. This conversation is over." Brooks hung up the phone. He sat perfectly still for a moment, the silence of the Pentagon office rushing back in. He had fired the first shot. The battle was joined, and he had no intention of losing. The silence in Chief Rodney Palmer's office was suffocating. He slowly placed the phone receiver back onto its cradle, his hand trembling slightly. A 4-star admiral, a federal civil rights lawsuit, the Department of Justice. The words echoed in his head like a death knell for his career and his quiet little town. Palmer immediately picked up his cell phone and dialed the mayor of Windsor, Richard Hayes. When Hayes heard the details, his reaction was a string of profanities that lasted a full minute. "Get ahead of it, Rodney," Hayes bellowed through the phone. "Call the Union. Call Bill O'Rourke. We need to control the narrative before this Navy hotshot turns us into the next national headline." Bill O'Rourke, the abrasive head of the Regional Police Union, arrived in Windsor within the hour. O'Rourke was a man who made his living defending the indefensible, a master of spinning police misconduct into split-second life-or-death decisions. "They're bluffing," O'Rourke scoffed, reviewing the incident report in Palmer's office. "He's throwing his weight around. We've got qualified immunity. The guy refused a lawful order to exit his vehicle during a high-risk traffic stop. Gutierrez used non-lethal compliance tools. We stand by the officers." "Bill, he has the body camera footage," Palmer said, rubbing his temples. "So do we," O'Rourke replied with a sly grin. "And it's all about how you edit the movie, Chief." By Tuesday evening, a highly edited 12-second clip of the traffic stop found its way to a sympathetic local news station. The clip was meticulously scrubbed of context. It started exactly at the moment Officer Gutierrez was screaming, "Get out of the fucking car now," and showed Admiral Brooks sitting behind the wheel refusing to move. It cut away right before the pepper spray was deployed. The local anchor ran the segment with a biased angle, a tense standoff on Highway 460. Windsor police forced to deal with an uncooperative driver who refused lawful commands during a dark, rainy traffic stop. Union officials say the officers acted by the book. In Washington, D.C. Commander David Ross burst into Admiral Brooks's office, holding a tablet playing the local news broadcast. "Sir, they leaked a doctored clip," Ross said, his jaw clenched in anger. "They are trying to paint you as the aggressor. They're testing the waters to see if they can smear your reputation before we file the suit." Brooks watched the 12-second clip. He didn't blink. He didn't shout. Instead, a chilling, calculated calm settled over him. This was exactly what he expected from a deeply entrenched system of localized corruption. They were doubling down. "Commander Belbush," Brooks said, his voice deadly quiet. "Have the lawsuit filed with the federal court first thing tomorrow morning. And Captain Jenkins," Sarah Jenkins stepped forward from the doorway. "Yes, Admiral." "Call the Pentagon press office, then contact the producers at CBS News and the Washington Post," Brooks ordered. "Give them the full unredacted 45-minute body camera video from both officers. Give them the audio files. Let them see the entire movie." Wednesday morning, the world woke up to a firestorm. The major news networks led their morning broadcasts with the explosive, unedited footage. The contrast between the 12-second leaked clip and the agonizing reality of the full video was staggering. Millions of Americans watched as a decorated military hero, hands calmly on his steering wheel, was threatened with a lethal electrocution metaphor, fixing to ride the lightning, and then brutally pepper-sprayed and thrown to the wet pavement. The internet erupted. The hashtag Ride the Lightning trended globally within hours alongside hashtag Admiral Brooks. The sheer audacity of the police officers, their complete lack of de-escalation, and their immediate resort to extreme violence against a compliant older black man sparked a tidal wave of national outrage. By noon, the Pentagon issued a rare, strongly worded official statement. The Secretary of Defense publicly condemned the actions of the Windsor Police Department, stating that Admiral Brooks is a patriot of the highest order, and the treatment he received is an affront to the uniform he wears and the nation he serves. The Governor of Virginia immediately announced an independent state-level investigation, while the Department of Justice officially opened a civil rights probe into the Windsor Police Department. Down in Windsor, the police station was besieged. News vans clogged the streets. Protesters gathered on the town square. The switchboard was completely paralyzed by furious callers from all over the country. Officer Joe Gutierrez and Officer Daniel Crocker were suspended without pay, a massive blow to the union's previous stance. But the union wasn't done fighting. O'Rourke knew they were losing the public relations war, so he initiated the next phase of their defense: destroy the victim. The police union hired Harrison Caldwell, a notoriously ruthless defense attorney, known for representing disgraced cops. Caldwell's strategy was always the same: put the victim on trial. In his first press conference, Caldwell stood defiantly in front of the Windsor courthouse. "What we have here is a high-ranking military official who believes he is above the law," Caldwell announced to the sea of microphones. Admiral Brooks used his rank to intimidate these young officers. He felt the rules of the road didn't apply to him. We will prove that his refusal to comply was a calculated act of arrogance, not fear. Behind closed doors, Caldwell filed aggressive discovery motions. He demanded access to Brooks's entire unredacted military service record, searching desperately for any history of insubordination, disciplinary action, or anger management issues. He subpoenaed medical records attempting to claim that Brooks's reaction was due to PTSD or some other underlying psychological instability. It was a classic fishing expedition designed to embarrass and exhaust the plaintiff. But Caldwell had severely underestimated Commander David Ross. Ross didn't just block the subpoenas with a heavy-handed federal injunction, he counterattacked with a brilliant legal maneuver. If Caldwell wanted to open the door to patterns of behavior, Ross argued before the federal judge, then the defense must also provide all internal communications from the Windsor Police Department. The judge agreed. Ross was granted full access to the department's emails, radio dispatch logs, and most crucially, the officers' departmental text messages over the past 5 years. Brooks's legal team, bolstered by analysts, quietly recommended by Brooks's allies in naval intelligence, began combing through terabytes of data. They weren't just looking for Gutierrez and Crocker, they were looking at the entire ecosystem of the Windsor precinct. 2 weeks later, Caldwell and Ross met in a sterile conference room in Richmond for the first round of depositions. Gutierrez sat beside Caldwell, looking remarkably less arrogant than he had on the side of Highway 460. He wore an ill-fitting suit, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Ross began the deposition, gently walking Gutierrez through his academy training, his understanding of the use of force continuum, and his definition of a high-risk stop. Gutierrez, coached well by Caldwell, stuck to the script. He felt his life was in danger. The tinted windows were a threat. The non-compliance was a precursor to violence. Then Ross opened a thick manila folder. "Officer Gutierrez," Ross said smoothly, sliding a printed document across the table. "Are you familiar with a WhatsApp group chat titled The 460 Toll Booth?" Gutierrez physically flinched. The color completely drained from his face. Caldwell leaned forward, suddenly alert, sensing the impending disaster. I don't recall," Gutierrez stammered. "Let me refresh your memory," Ross continued reading from the printout. "This is a chat group involving yourself, Officer Crocker, Lieutenant Vance, and 5 other current officers. On the night of October 12th last year, you texted the group, 'Bagged another out-of-stater in a Benz tonight. Dark tint.' You know the drill. Had him shaking in his boots." Officer Crocker responded with a trophy emoji. Caldwell slammed his hand on the table. "Objection. This is entirely irrelevant to the events of the night in question. This is a blatant character assassination." "It goes to pattern and practice counselor," Ross fired back, never taking his eyes off Gutierrez. And it gets worse. Let's look at the messages from the night my client was assaulted. Ross pulled out another page. 10 minutes before pulling over, Admiral Brooks, Officer Crocker, ran his temporary plates through the National Crime Information Center. The system returned the registered owner as Mason Brooks, with an address in a highly affluent zip code in Washington, D.C. Crocker then texted you, Officer Gutierrez, got a live one. Fancy D.C. address, no front tags. Let's make him sweat. Gutierrez stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing silently. You knew he wasn't a threat, Ross said, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute condemnation. You knew he was an older man driving a legally registered vehicle. You didn't pull him over because you suspected a crime. You pulled him over for a power trip. You and your colleagues treated a stretch of Virginia highway like your own personal hunting ground. Caldwell grabbed Gutierrez by the arm. We are ending this deposition. My client is asserting his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. You can walk out, Mr. Caldwell, Ross said coldly as the defense attorney scrambled to pack his briefcase. But this transcript is going straight to the Department of Justice investigators who arrived in Windsor this morning. You tried to put the Admiral's character on trial. You just handed us the evidence to dismantle your entire police department. As Gutierrez practically sprinted out of the conference room, Ross picked up his cell phone and texted Brooks a single word, checkmate. The trap had sprung perfectly. By aggressively trying to destroy Brooks's sterling reputation, the defense had justified the deep dive into their own corrupt practices. The case was no longer just about one horrific traffic stop. It was about exposing a systemic ring of racial profiling, extortion, and civil rights abuses that had plagued the town for a decade. The drama was far from over, but the tides had irreversibly turned. The morning after the disastrous deposition, the town of Windsor looked less like a quiet Virginia municipality and more like a federal crime scene. A fleet of black SUVs from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, flanked by FBI agents carrying thick, empty cardboard boxes, descended on the Windsor Police Department. They had federal warrants, signed by a judge who had read exactly 3 pages of the 460 toll booth WhatsApp transcripts before greenlighting the raid. Agents confiscated hard drives, server racks, personnel files, and the personal cell phones of every officer on the payroll. Inside City Hall, the panic was absolute. Mayor Richard Hayes paced his office, screaming into his phone at the town's insurance underwriters who were threatening to drop Windsor's liability coverage entirely. Police Chief Rodney Palmer had locked himself in his office, furiously typing out a letter of resignation he hoped would save his pension. But the most dramatic shift was happening behind closed doors in a cheap motel outside of town, where Officer Joe Gutierrez was finally realizing the reality of his situation. Harrison Caldwell, the abrasive union lawyer, had summoned Gutierrez to the motel room. Caldwell poured himself a coffee and looked at the disgraced officer with cold detachment. "Joe, we need to have a serious conversation about damage control," Caldwell said, not bothering to offer Gutierrez a seat. "The DOJ is preparing federal deprivation of rights charges. The union is going to issue a statement distancing itself from your specific actions on the night in question. We'll say you went rogue, violated department training protocols, and acted outside the scope of your employment." Gutierrez felt the air leave his lungs. "Wait, you're throwing me under the bus. You told me the union had my back. You told me to hold the line. The union protects the badge." "Joe," Caldwell replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Right now, you are a liability to that badge. We are going to protect the other officers. You need to prepare yourself for prison time." Gutierrez stumbled out of the motel room, his mind racing. He had been a bully with a badge, emboldened by a corrupt culture, but he wasn't stupid. He knew exactly how the criminal justice system worked because he had fed people into it for years. If the union was cutting him loose, he was looking at 10 to 20 years in federal lockup. He didn't go home. Instead, Gutierrez drove straight to the FBI field office in Norfolk. By noon the next day, Commander David Ross received a phone call from the lead DOJ prosecutor. Ross immediately walked into Admiral Brooks's Pentagon office, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Sir," Ross said, standing at attention. Gutierrez flipped. The union tried to burn him to save the department, so he bypassed them and walked right into the FBI field office. He signed a proffer agreement. He's telling them everything. Brooks looked up from a strategic briefing on the Pacific Theater, his expression stoic. "Everything regarding our traffic stop. Bigger, Admiral." "Much bigger," Ross replied. "He's outlining a systemic, decade-long conspiracy." He testified that the town administration, including the mayor and the chief of police, mandated illegal quotas. They explicitly directed officers to target out-of-state drivers, specifically minorities, using the tinted windows and temporary tags as pretextual stops. They used aggressive citations, asset forfeiture, and inflated towing fees to fund the town's operating budget. It was a municipal shakedown operation disguised as law enforcement. Brooks slowly closed his briefing folder. The battle had escalated from a personal civil rights violation to the dismantling of an entire corrupt enterprise. "And Officer Crocker?" Brooks asked. "Indicted this morning," Ross confirmed. "Along with 4 other officers in that group chat, Chief Palmer and Mayor Hayes. The DOJ is freezing the town's assets. The FBI has wire fraud charges pending against the mayor for misappropriating the funds they stole from motorists." "Good," Brooks said quietly, standing up and smoothing his uniform jacket. "But criminal charges aren't enough. People go to prison, but the system rebuilds itself with new faces. We need to tear the foundation out." "What are your orders?" "Admiral, contact the town's legal representation," Brooks instructed. "Tell them we are ready to discuss the terms of our civil settlement, and tell them I require a face-to-face meeting with Mr. Gutierrez as part of the conditions." Ross looked surprised. "So you don't have to sit in a room with that man ever again. The criminal courts will handle him." "I am aware of what the courts will do." "David," Brooks replied, his eyes hard and unyielding. "But he needs to understand exactly who he tried to break. Set it up." The settlement conference did not take place in a courtroom, but rather in a cavernous, windowless conference room deep within a neutral federal building in Richmond, Virginia. The air conditioning hummed aggressively, keeping the room at a sterile, freezing temperature that perfectly matched the atmosphere. The town of Windsor, now facing absolute municipal bankruptcy and entirely abandoned by their liability insurance underwriters, was completely at Admiral Mason Brooks's mercy. Across the wide expanse of a polished mahogany table sat the town's newly appointed emergency legal counsel. They were 3 pale, visibly sweating attorneys who looked utterly defeated before the proceedings had even begun. Mayor Richard Hayes and Chief Rodney Palmer were conspicuously absent, both currently sitting in federal holding cells, awaiting their own bail hearings. Commander David Ross stood at the head of the table, his posture radiating military precision. He opened a thick leather binder and laid out the terms with the dispassionate efficiency of a tactical strike. "Gentlemen, we are not here to negotiate." Ross began, his voice echoing sharply off the wood-paneled walls. "Admiral Brooks has no interest in profiting personally from the grotesque corruption of your municipality. The financial penalty for the civil rights violations inflicted upon my client is set at $8 million. One of the city attorneys audibly gasped, his hands trembling as he reached for a glass of water. "Commander Ross, the town. We simply do not have that kind of capital. A judgment of that size will force an immediate municipal dissolution. That is the consequence of funding your town through systemic, racially motivated extortion, Ross replied coldly. However, the entirety of the $8 million will be placed into an irrevocable trust. It will not go to the Admiral. Instead, it will fund the establishment of a permanent legal defense clinic, the Highway 460 Civil Rights Initiative. This clinic will provide elite pro bono legal representation for victims of police brutality, unlawful asset forfeiture, and racial profiling across the entire state of Virginia. You will literally fund the very entity designed to destroy organizations like yours. Ross flipped a page in his binder. Furthermore, the town of Windsor will submit to a federal consent decree. Effective immediately, your police department will be placed under external receivership. You will be monitored by the Department of Justice for the next 15 years. Every departmental policy, every single hire, every use of force report, and every routine traffic stop will be federally audited. If you do not sign this document today, we proceed to trial, and we will ensure the town of Windsor ceases to exist as a legal entity. The city attorneys stared at the paperwork. They had absolutely no leverage. With shaking hands, the lead counsel uncapped his pen and signed the settlement agreement, effectively signing away the corrupt foundation of their town. With the paperwork finalized, the city's legal team hastily packed their briefcases and practically fled the room. They left only Admiral Brooks, Commander Ross, and a single heavily armed United States Marshal guarding the heavy oak door. "It is done, Admiral," Ross said quietly, closing his binder. Brooks nodded once. "Bring him in." Ross signaled the Marshal. A moment later, the heavy door clicked open, and Joe Gutierrez was escorted into the freezing room. The man who walked through the door was unrecognizable from the terrifying armed enforcer who had stalked the rainy pavement of Highway 460. Gutierrez was currently out on federal bail, awaiting a sentencing hearing that would undoubtedly send him away for over a decade. He wore a cheap, oversized gray civilian sweater and slacks that looked unwashed. His shoulders were slumped, his posture curled inward as if he were trying to shrink himself out of existence. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the hollowed-out, deeply terrified look of a man whose life had completely and irreversibly disintegrated. He sat in the chair previously occupied by the city attorneys across from the four-star Admiral. Brooks dressed impeccably in his Navy service dress. Blue uniform looked like a monument carved from dark granite. The 4 silver stars on his collar caught the harsh fluorescent light. Brooks let the silence stretch. 1 minute passed, then 2. He wanted Gutierrez to feel the crushing, absolute weight of the room. He wanted the silence to strip away any remaining illusions the former officer held. "Look at me, Mr. Gutierrez," Brooks finally commanded. The voice was not a shout. It was a low, steady rumble, but it carried an inherent terrifying authority that made the disgraced officer physically flinch. Gutierrez slowly raised his head, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. He was unable to meet Brooks's unwavering gaze for more than a fraction of a second before looking down at his own trembling hands. "When you pulled my vehicle over on that dark highway," Brooks began every word, precise and cutting, "you did not see a fellow citizen. You did not see an American whom you swore an oath to protect. You saw a target. You saw an older black man whom you believed you could humiliate, terrorize, and extort because you operated under the delusion that the cheap piece of tin on your chest made you a god." Gutierrez swallowed hard, his throat working convulsively. A single tear slipped down his cheek, dropping onto the mahogany table. "Admiral, I am so sorry. I lost my way." The department, the quotas. I was just following the culture. Do not insult my intelligence by blaming culture. Brooks cut him off, his voice cracking like a whip. I have commanded tens of thousands of young men and women in active combat zones. I have sent them into the most dangerous waters on this planet, into situations where their lives were in actual imminent peril, and I demand from an 18-year-old enlisted sailor more discipline, more restraint, and far more moral courage in a single afternoon than you displayed in your entire miserable career. Brooks leaned forward slowly, placing his large, heavily scarred hands flat on the table, closing the physical distance between them. You drew your service weapon on an unarmed, compliant man. You threatened to execute me. You used a chemical weapon to blind me while my hands were clearly visible, and you threw me into the mud. Brooks said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet, intense register. But you failed to break me, because true authority does not come from the barrel of a gun, and human dignity cannot be taken by brute force. Gutierrez was openly weeping, now his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with ragged, pathetic sobs. You are going to federal prison. Brooks continued, entirely unmoved by the tears. You will lose your freedom, your pension, your reputation, and your right to ever wear a uniform again. But I demanded you be brought into this room today, so you could look directly at the face of the man who ended your reign of terror. I want you to remember this face every single day you sit in your 6x9 cell. I want you to remember that when you went looking for a victim to abuse, you pulled over the wrong man. Brooks stood up in one fluid motion, towering over the broken former officer. He adjusted his pristine white cover, the gold braid gleaming sharply. He did not look back at Gutierrez. Commander Ross, our business here is concluded, Brooks stated. Without waiting for a response, Admiral Mason Brooks turned and walked out of the conference room, his stride perfectly measured and purposeful. He navigated the quiet corridors of the federal building, pushed through the heavy glass double doors, and stepped out into the bright, blinding Virginia sunlight. The domestic battle was decisively won. A systemic criminal enterprise disguised as law enforcement had been completely eradicated, and a powerful precedent had been forged that would echo across the nation. He climbed into the back of his waiting Navy staff car, the engine purring to life. He had a fleet waiting for his orders, and the deep waters ahead required his absolute attention. Admiral Brooks's story is a chilling reminder of the realities that still exist on the dark stretches of American highways, where power is abused and the vulnerable are targeted. But more importantly, it is a testament to the incredible power of moral courage. Brooks didn't just fight back for himself. He used his immense platform, his unyielding discipline, and his strategic brilliance to dismantle an entire system of corruption that had preyed on innocent citizens for years. He proved that true strength isn't about the volume of your voice or the weapon on your hip. It's about the unshakable resolve to hold the line for justice, no matter the personal cost. If this incredible true-to-life story of Admiral Brooks standing up against corruption and fighting for civil rights resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes to light, and that one person with enough courage can change a broken system. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives